is because I've had it for 32 years. And it makes people very curious, because how can you always be on the front pages wrong?
Have you ever watched someone's entire world fall apart right in front of you in real time? Just 5 minutes ago, Buckingham Palace delivered news so devastating and so absolute that it sent shockwaves across the globe. Sarah Ferguson, the woman everyone once called Fergie, the Duchess of York, the redhead, who used to laugh beside Princess Diana, has now been completely cut off from the royal family. But here's what the headlines aren't telling you: this wasn't a simple notice, this was a calculated removal, and the real motives behind this decision are far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Before sunrise on December 2nd, a senior palace aide rushed into the press room at Buckingham Palace. The message was so blunt and so shocking that veteran reporters, people who've covered every royal scandal possible, stood frozen in disbelief. The Duchess of York will be stripped of all remaining royal provisions, effective immediately. Let me say that again, immediately, not phased out, not gradually reduced, but cut out. The silence that followed lasted only seconds before full-scale chaos erupted. Phones blew up with frantic calls, editors shouted urgent commands. Within minutes, the announcement spread across BBC, Sky News, CNN, and every major network worldwide. One American anchor summed up the moment perfectly: "This is not a clarification, this is a severing. But why now, and what is the palace hiding behind these walls? Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you understood about this story." The backstory: to understand why the palace acted with such ruthless speed, we have to go back to when the warning signs were already forming, long before the public noticed anything unusual. Here's what they don't want you to know. Inside the royal household, Sarah's situation wasn't seen as a sudden crisis. It was viewed as the slow, inevitable unraveling of a woman trapped in the tightening grip of royal rules, financial disaster, and shifting political currents. When King Charles took the throne, he brought with him a governing mindset his advisors predicted for decades: a slimmer-down monarchy, smaller, sharper, and far less tolerant of anyone who carried what they labelled reputational risk. Under Queen Elizabeth, Sarah was always the exception. She was invited to family gatherings, allowed to stay at Royal Lodge with Prince Andrew, treated with kindness. Despite her missteps, Elizabeth ruled with grace, memory, and sentiment, but Charles stepped in. Different world, a world where online criticism is brutal, where political pressure never lets up, where the institution could no longer afford what one senior aide quietly called nostalgic allowances. And here's the uncomfortable truth that changed everything. Unlike Andrew, Sarah had no HRH title. Unlike working royals, she had no public duties to justify security or housing support. And unlike the new generation, William, Catherine, and their children represented an older version of the monarchy. Weighed down by controversies, the Crown desperately wanted to bury forever inside palace meetings. Discussions about Royal Lodge began far earlier than anyone realised. The rising maintenance costs, the future of grace and favour homes, the legal agreements tying Andrew to the property. Every time those issues resurfaced, Sarah's name came up as an unavoidable complication. With no title, no duties, and no defined place within the institution, she was an anomaly in a system built on strict hierarchy. But tradition and cost weren't the only forces pushing this change. Here's where it turns dark. By late 2022, political figures in Westminster began quietly but firmly pressuring the monarchy to address lingering concerns tied to the Epstein fallout. The public, especially those who remembered the scandals of the 1990s, increasingly questioned why a non-working divorced duchess was still living on a crown estate property. The palace noticed, they tracked the polling, they saw the trend. Sarah was becoming a symbol of everything Charles' modernization plan aimed to eliminate. Can you see it now? The walls were already closing, and the decision wasn't if, but when. And as those pressures grew, legal, financial, reputational, political, once small conversations about Sarah's future turned sharper, more urgent, and impossible to ignore. Catherine's discovery. But someone else in this story quietly recognised how serious the situation had become. Princess Catherine. The first real hints of trouble didn't from headlines or scandals, they came from subtle, easily overlooked inconsistencies only the closest insiders would notice. And for Catherine, whose life had been shaped by decades of protocol and public expectation, these irregularities around Sarah Ferguson felt like warning signals no one else wanted to confront. It began in early 2023. During a routine briefing at Kensington Palace, Catherine overheard two staff members discussing Windsor properties. One mentioned royal lodges. Maintenance costs had doubled again, the other added cautiously, The complication remains: Sarah still lives, there still isn't a working royal, still tied to Andrew's weakened position. Catherine didn't interrupt. She just paused, listening to the tone, because she knew that when palace staff speak carefully, something deeper is brewing. Weeks later, another inconsistency emerged. Catherine received a briefing outline summarizing public opinion toward different royal branches. Most of it was predictable: strong support for the Wales family, cautious approval for Charles modernization. But one graph stood out: a sudden spike in negative sentiment tied to the York household, not toward Beatrice or Eugenie, who remained privately respected, but directed specifically at Sarah. The wording was telling: public perception reflects unresolved associations and outdated expectations. Catherine knew exactly what that meant. People were questioning why Sarah still lived on royal property with no formal role and ongoing controversies. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a spring charity visit, Catherine greeted well-wishers along the rope line when an older woman leaned in and gently asked, "Dear, why is the Duchess of York still in that big house if she's not working for the crown? It doesn't seem quite right, does it?" Catherine smiled kindly, offering a diplomatic answer. But inside, she felt a tightening. Think about that: when everyday citizens voice the same concerns, advisors whisper. The gap between public awareness and palace silence has become too dangerous. Inside Windsor, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Staff, who once called Andrew and Sarah's arrangement odd but manageable, now used different language. Strained, unsettled, unstable. Even more alarming were the briefings about foreign media. American outlets quietly began tying Sarah back into the Epstein narrative because of her past emails, including the infamous one calling him a supreme friend, and the renewed congressional inquiry. Catherine understood how catastrophic that was once someone becomes part of an intonation. Al scandal conversation, the Crown's risk assessment changes instantly, and Sarah had no title, no role, no institutional shield, no functional reason to keep her within the royal system. By late summer, Catherine was shown an internal document summarizing outside reputational threats. Sarah's name appeared prominently. The explanation was blunt: non-working royal with unstable finances, public visibility, and unresolved associations invites scrutiny incompatible with modernization. What that means in royal language: it was the beginning of the end. The strategic meeting. By December, palace conversations shifted from quiet concern to strategic action. The question was no longer whether something must be done, it was how far the crown would go. At the center of this shift was Queen Camilla, a woman who understood better than most how fragile the monarchy's public standing could be. Camilla's mornings usually began with thick folders of press summaries, but recently an alarming trend had appeared. Major American outlets were no longer focusing solely on Prince Andrew's downfall. They were shifting their spotlight to Sarah. Articles in the Washington Post, segments on MSNBC, late-night discussions on CNN, questioning why the Duchess of York still lived in a Crown estate home, while carrying reputational risks tied to Andrew and her own financial troubles. The tone shifted from curiosity to open criticism, and for a monarchy extremely sensitive about global perception, this mattered. Camilla called a private meeting in the Green Drawing Room, a quiet space safe from eavesdropping. Those invited included Sir Edward Chapman, a senior advisor with deep crisis management experience; Fiona Lyall, a communications strategist known for sharp instincts; and Rupert Kine, a former editor who helped the palace through past media storms. She started calmly, but the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. Public patience is not endless, and neither is institutional tolerance, Sir Edward opened a document summarizing the rise in international coverage. Mentions of Sarah's money troubles, the Epstein ties, and the revived congressional inquiry were climbing rapidly in US news cycles. Even British outlets, once cautious about criticizing Sarah, were now framing her presence at Royal Lodge as an inconsistent exception. Then Princess Anne joined the discussion, and she was direct: "We're trying to streamline the monarchy, not drag outdated baggage into the future." Anne had always liked Sarah personally, especially in the days they navigated public scrutiny with Diana, but Anne believed institutions only survive when they prioritize rules, not memories. William, briefed separately, echoed the view in his calm, measured way. He understood the tension between duty and compassion, but he also saw the stakes. In one difficult meeting, he reportedly said, "We cannot keep carrying burdens that do not belong to the future we're trying to build." But the most powerful insight came from the communications team. Analysts presented data showing a major rise in negative sentiment among US viewers over 50, a group loyal, highly engaged and nostalgic for the Diana monarchy. The numbers were crushing. This key audience was openly frustrated with unresolved issues surrounding the Yorks. Then came the turning point. A young staffer reviewing online metrics said something that stopped the room cold. People aren't watching this as royal drama, they're watching it as a moral issue. How much responsibility does a family hold for the actions of someone connected to them? That captured exactly why the story was exploding internationally. Camilla and Charles reviewed the final draft statement. The language was polished, neutral, and deeply institutional. It didn't blame Sarah, it didn't reference specific scandals, it framed the move as procedural, necessary, and aligned with long-term restructuring. But beneath the calm tone, anyone familiar with royal subtext knew what it meant. The crown stepping away for good before final approval. Camilla added a suggestion shaped by her own history with public judgment. We must ensure this doesn't sound like punishment, it must sound like policy. Charles agreed. Several sentences were rewritten to highlight neutrality and precedent. Instead of personal issues, December 2nd was selected as the release date inside the palace. A quiet acknowledgement settled the decision was final, and its impact would ripple far beyond Windsor and Buckingham Palace. The announcement at 7:20 a.m. on December 2nd, the full palace statement went live, a carefully worded message that spread across the world within minutes. It was brief, polished, and unquestionably final. The Crown confirmed that effective immediately, Sarah Ferguson would no longer receive housing support, security consideration, or transitional assistance from the royal household. Every line felt like a door shutting permanently for Sarah. The impact was instant and devastating. She was sitting at a small writing desk in a London hotel suite when her phone began buzzing non-stop. She had moved there quietly days earlier, sensing something major was coming, but never knowing the exact timing or severity. When she saw the official Buckingham Palace header appear on her screen, she froze for a few moments. She just stared, reading the statement twice, as if the words might somehow change. They didn't. What hit her first wasn't the loss of royal logithat had been predicted for months. It was the tone, the lack of warmth, the strict formality, the unmistakable signal that the Crown was drawing a clear, permanent line between Sarah Ferguson and the institution she once married into. No matter the years she spent rebuilding her image, the charity work, the children's books, the public resilience, and none of it mattered now in the eyes of the monarchy. She was no longer part of its future. Around the world, newsroom reactions were a mix of shock and grim understanding. Charles' modernization plan had always hinted at a leaner, more disciplined monarchy, but no one expected it to strike this hard or this publicly at the Duchess of York. The timing felt surgical. Andrew was already being moved to a smaller Sandringham property. The Epstein investigation in the US was accelerating. Parliament's pressure for ethical clarity around royal associations was at its highest in years. To observers, it was obvious that Sarah had become a liability. The Crown could no longer defend. Global media coverage intensified as commentators reviewed her long list of setbacks, her financial disasters, including the failed Pegasus Bitcoin deal, the notorious email calling Epstein a supreme friend, her charity partnerships now reshaped as a career derailed by association and misjudgment, and even her personal resilience, once praised, now framed as part of a tragic pattern involving a woman who had been offered second chances but never secured steady footing. The daughter's urgent plan. But while the world analysed the public fallout, something far more intimate and far more desperate was unfolding behind the scenes. Beatrice and Eugenie had been bracing for this moment. According to sources close to the sisters, they were heartbroken, but not surprised. They had known for weeks that the December 2nd announcement would be final, and they had taken steps quickly, to prepare their mother's escape route. Their property in the coastal region of Comporta, Portugal, had already been set up. Staff arranged temporary housing, local contacts helped secure privacy upon arrival. Understand this clearly, this wasn't a holiday getaway, this was a relocation plan, a survival plan. The sisters moved with military precision, determined to make sure their mother had somewhere safe, secluded and stable to land. But underneath the practical preparations sat a deeper, more painful fear that once Sarah left the UK, the distance between her and the monarchy would become permanent, irreversible. Meanwhile, inside the palace, advisors felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief, because a long-standing institutional dilemma had finally settled. Unease, because Sarah remained unpredictable, historically outspoken, a woman who had never slipped away quietly. Her financial instability made her vulnerable to book contracts. Her long connection to Andrew meant she held knowledge that could further disrupt the monarchy if ever exposed, and her reputation as someone who refused to disappear made her next moves impossible to foresee the hidden motives. Now, we reach the question everyone is asking, but nobody is truthfully answering. What are the real motives behind this decision? Because if you think this is simply about modernization or cost-cutting, you're missing the real story. Let me break down what's actually unfolding inside those palace walls. Motive 1: the Epstein shadow, the revived congressional inquiry in the United States, isn't just targeting Andrew. Investigators have begun requesting information about financial interactions, communications, and associations connected to Sarah, her past emails, her business connections, her closeness to people under investigation. All of it creates exposure the Crown cannot risk by cutting ties with Sarah. Now the palace creates legal separation. If she's questioned, investigated, or implicated in any way, the monarchy can truthfully say she has no formal link to the institution. Look at the timing. This announcement arrives just as international scrutiny accelerates. That's not coincidence, that's strategy. Motive 2: financial liability. Sarah's financial history is a hazard zone, the failed business projects, the growing debts, the risky partnerships. Each one represents a potential embarrassment for the monarchy. But here's what's truly concerning. Sources suggest Sarah may have been seeking financial assistance from the royal household to cover legal fees and security expenses. The palace had to choose: keep supporting someone with no official role, or sever the connection entirely. They chose separation over support. Motive 3: the American audience. Here's something crucial most British outlets are overlooking. The palace follows American sentiment extremely closely, and American viewers, especially those over 50 who represent a huge and loyal audience, have been increasingly vocal about the York situation. Polling data showed this group questioning the monarchy's judgment in keeping ties with Sarah, given the controversies for an institution that relies on global goodwill and soft power. Losing American confidence is unthinkable. This announcement was aimed just as much at Washington and New York as it was at London. Motive 4: William's succession planning. Here's the part nobody is openly discussing. William is thinking decades ahead. He's shaping a monarchy for George, Charlotte, and Louis. And in that vision, there is no space for complicated scandal-linked figures from the past. Sources close to William say he has been the strongest voice demanding clean breaks, not out of cruelty, but out of strategic necessity. Every lingering scandal from the previous generation becomes ammunition that can be used against the future. Sarah represents everything William intends to leave behind. Motive 5: the Portugal strategy. Why Portugal? Why Comporta specifically? Because it sits outside certain EU cooperation frameworks for specific inquiries, because it's quiet, remote, and far removed from British tabloid swarms, because it allows the palace to say Sarah relocated abroad for personal reasons without acknowledging she has effectively been exiled. Portugal isn't merely a fresh start, it's a controlled containment inside the palace. The hours following the announcement carried a tension that settled across the entire royal system. Though delivered with trademark restraint, the consequences were anything but soft. Within minutes, the legal office convened in a quiet chamber facing the gardens, a room usually reserved for constitutional matters, not family consequences. Yet Sarah's situation had entered legal territory. Advisors reviewed Crown estate lease rules, stipulations within the Succession to the Crown Act, regulations governing non-working royals. One lawyer summarized it with harsh precision: Her Royal Highness status is gone, her support structures are gone under current statute. There is no pathway back. It was a legal statement, not an emotional one. But its finality echoed deeply even among those accustomed to strict boundaries at Windsor. The reality had already begun reshaping Prince Andrew's world. The logistics team confirmed he would be moved to a smaller Sandringham property before Christmas. Downsizing presented as routine restructuring, though everyone understood the symbolism. Andrew would remain within the Crown's perimeter. Sarah would not. Their long, unconventional domestic arrangement had finally reached a breaking point, driven not by emotion, but by policy. At Kensington Palace, William observed the developments in thoughtful silence. He held no personal hostility towards Sarah, but he understood the political danger tied to her financial problems and her closeness to Andrew's scandals. Privately, staff noted William seemed more relieved than troubled. A long-standing uncertainty had been resolved. Catherine's view, though quieter, was equally grounded. She felt compassion for Sarah. Both women had endured the merciless tabloid cycle. But Catherine also recognized the palace couldn't protect someone whose presence conflicted with modernization goals. In her perspective, allowing Sarah to step away, however severe the optics, was the only sustainable long-term decision. The practical nightmare inside the Administrative offices' aides sorted through practical consequences that read like a checklist of crisis. Without royal backing, Sarah would no longer qualify for security coverage and immediate concern. Given renewed public attention to her past, the Home Office confirmed she would need to organise her own security abroad. Any travel to countries cooperating with US investigations would require careful legal planning. These weren't hypothetical problems, they were immediate, potentially dangerous. Operation realities. The financial outlook was just as bleak. Without housing support, without security assistance, without the safety net she had leaned on for decades, Sarah would need to generate substantial income quickly. And here's where it becomes truly alarming. A financially pressured Sarah Ferguson, with personal knowledge of royal operations, private relationships and confidential discussions, represents exactly the type of vulnerability that keeps palace advisors awake at night. Book, contracts, tell-all interviews, documentary deals, each represents a potential explosive scenario. The palace may have cut ties, but it hadn't removed risk, it may have heightened it. The daughters' heartbreak. Beatrice and Eugenie found themselves trapped in an impossible emotional conflict. Daughters torn between institutional logic and maternal loyalty. They understood the palace's decision. They had witnessed the mounting pressures, the contradictions, the inevitability. But understanding didn't soften the devastation of watching their mother be officially removed from the only world she had been part of for nearly 40 years. According to insiders, both sisters contacted their mother within minutes of the announcement. The conversations were short, emotional, and centered on immediate necessities. Because in crisis, the York women do what they've always done: they act, they protect, they endure. The preparations intensified. Documents were delivered discreetly, bank accounts were reviewed, legal counsel was hired for the Portugal move. Every detail mattered. Because one mistake could expose their mother to dangers the palace was no longer obligated to shield her from. But beneath all the logistical urgency sat a question neither daughter wanted to ask out loud. Once their mother left British soil, essentially exiled from the institution their grandmother once guided, would she ever truly return? Global reaction. Now here's where I need your voice. Which country or city are you watching this from? Because this story is being interpreted entirely differently depending on where you sit. In America, viewers see this as the monarchy finally taking responsibility for modern ethical standards. Even if late in Britain, the response is split. Older generations remember Sarah warmly and view this as unnecessarily harsh. Younger audiences see it as overdue institutional cleanup. In Europe, especially in nations with their own monarchies, analysts are treating this as a model for how modern royal families handle legacy issues. In Commonwealth nations, reactions range from sympathetic to frustrated that the monarchy continues creating drama when it should focus on genuine service. Your viewpoint matters, because the global response will shape how historians eventually interpret this moment. Sarah's silent reaction. As night settled on December 2nd, Sarah remained in that London hotel suite. She hadn't released a statement, hadn't made a public appearance, hadn't even posted online. A silence that, for the woman known for always speaking her mind, stayed silent, and that silence spoke louder than any statement, as those close to her described someone caught between shock and determined focus, who had survived scandals, endured divorce, financial collapse and public humiliation, but now faced something entirely different. Because this wasn't a mistake she could fix or a controversy she could outweight, it was an institutional rejection that was total and irreversible. And friends say she spent hours on the phone with her daughters, her legal advisors, and the few people who remained loyal while she reviewed documents, made lists, and mapped out her next steps with the clarity of someone who understood exactly how serious everything had become. Because Sarah Ferguson has never been passive, and as night settled over London, it became clear that the palace had made its move, and the world was waiting to see how she would answer it. And for King Charles and his advisors, this break from Sarah is both a win and a risky gamble, because while they removed a growing problem, protected their modernization agenda and created legal distance from any future controversies, they also created a financially vulnerable and potentially resentful former royal with decades of insider knowledge and nothing left to lose. And history shows exiled royals rarely fade quietly, whether it was the Duke and Duchess of Windsor or Princess Margaret or even Diana and Sarah, now holds that same unpredictable power, amplified by modern media and global platforms, and the palace is assuming she will accept her exile and disappear. But if financial pressure or frustration pushes her toward journalists, filmmakers or authors who would pay heavily for her story, then the palace may have created the exact threat it feared, And beneath all this are deeper lessons about power and reinvention, because unresolved issues only grow, no structure lasts forever. Institutions always protect themselves first, and sometimes a forced break becomes the only path to reinvention, and the hidden truth is that this moment is not the end of Sarah Ferguson's story, but the beginning of a new chapter, because for nearly 40 years she lived under monarchy standards, but now for the first time she is free to speak right and act without royal constraints, and whether this becomes liberation or devastation depends on her next move, because if she stays quiet the palace wins, but if she chooses to speak the institution may have empowered its most dangerous critic, and as the world absorbs this decision, it's clear that her fall from royal favour is more than a headline, it's a human story of resilience, consequences, and the cold calculations of power. And while the monarchy moves forward with its modernisation plan, Sarah faces the chance to rebuild in a way she never could under royal expectations, and now the world waits to see what she does next, what she reveals, and who she becomes beyond Windsor, because the fall of a duchess is not just royal drama, but a reminder of the fine line between consequence and reinvention, between institutional authority and personal freedom, and the palace may have declared her fate, but her real story may only be starting now.